Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below, and you can click on that, and you'll end up in Zoom. In there, you click on the link there, and you'll end up in Mukana. And that's where you become a producer for the show. You actually drive the entire conversation of the show with your questions and your votes. You can hang out there. You can talk to people. You can trade notes, but you can also ask questions and vote on those questions. If you think you can answer the questions, you can come in at 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to do a mic check. That makes sure that we know that you are ready for the show. If you're not sure if you're ready, then come in at 6 o'clock and you can check your kit. We talk about all kinds of stuff from 6 to 6:40, but now we're really there to check everybody's system. So we'd love to have you come in early, check your system, and then at 6:40 do mic checks, and then we'll start up. First hour is the first hour is really what we think is important around general discussion. So virtual and media production. Second hour is usually something specific that we want to talk about. Today we're going to talk about Mixed Effects Pro, which a lot of us are starting to use, and we have Atem here. He's the actual developer of Mixed Effect Pro. So he's going to be here, and he's going to answer your questions and talk a little bit about the software's history and how we got here and what it does. So that should be a great second hour. A reminder for everyone that tomorrow we are going to talk about, we're going to do Ruthless Reviews again for video. Yesterday we had audio. Tomorrow we'll do video. We're just continuing to kind of turn that crank in our quality. And then Friday we'll talk about USDZ, which is becoming part of our video pipeline. It's a 3D format that Apple has made popular, but it is an open format, and we're seeing it being added across the many different things, including Final Cut and Motion. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally on Saturday we have education, which is going to be a closed session as we kind of work through a lot of nuts and bolts about actually creating something that we're working on. So anyway, so that's coming up this week. Bill, why don't you go ahead and take it away? Can't hear you, Bill. I'm sure that there's a Stream Deck in there somewhere.
I got on Zoom mute rather than my
Now you're really low.
That's interesting. Something seemed to happen in the chain. Can you hear me now?
You're really low.
Really low still.
I can take the first question if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. We're gonna jump and have yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So this comes from A. Mitchell's from Washington. He goes, early last night, something weird happened in Mukana. Things were moving around, posts were shifted and corrupted. Then most of it was completely wiped out earlier than normal. What happened? Is it now fixed?
Yeah, it's typically we're working on between shows. so you probably saw, I know that there's a bunch of stuff that we're working on typically. So Chris usually is working on it at night. And so you'll see a bunch of changes happen and then it'll just get cleared. So that's probably, you just probably saw us working live in the app. So next question.
Let me see if I'm back now. Am I?
There you go.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to take a hardware piece out, but that's fine. All right. Second question comes from Rupert McCrae, and Rupert says, Dolby has a blog post on why audio matters for video calls. It cites all the usual reasons, but then says video should be at the top of your list and not let bad audio stop you. Can anyone understand their messaging? Dolby to blog March 10th. Well, Dolby IO blog March 10th.
I think they're trying to fit into, not scaring people away, but audio is more important in a conference call. Like it's, I don't even think that that's a subjective thing at this point. I guess some people can say that video is more important, but generally, being able to hear people clearly is super useful. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's content first, then audio, then video. Content, audio, video.
And I'd argue audio is higher than content. so like Clubhouse is a good example of content being on top and audio being second, and it's almost unlistenable for half of the shows. I mean, this is part of the problem that Clubhouse has, is that people get on their phones and it sounds horrible. So I'd say that no one can hear the content if they can't hear the audio. Go ahead, Bill.
When I was on the road for Video Make, I used to do this example. I had an audience full of people, and I would say, we're going to do a test. I would say, close your eyes. And I would say, hi, my name is Bill Davis. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I'd say, open your eyes. And I'd say, and I said that you just got video without audio and audio without video. What did you get the most information from? Yeah. The audio carries the heavy lifting for conversation, for information in almost all circumstances, just how it is.
I mean, in a perfect world, it's all of those things, right? But in the audio is the most important thing in a show. like I will argue that it is. People will listen to bad content for a lot longer if the audio is good. Go ahead, Jason.
Let's say audio is 51% at least of your video content that you do. But one of the things they add in here inside the blog is they talk about how important it is to understand people's body language and facial expressions, because you can pick up on cues that you normally wouldn't be able to without having good video. So they're just saying that good video is supplementary or adding to audio. Yeah. They're saying don't neglect it.
Yeah, no, and obviously we agree with that. so we agree that good video is there. One of the things that we've noticed as we've done point to points. So these are either individuals talking to each other. We've done a lot of Interatron over the internet. So, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows. I think I used to own like 15 teleprompters just to do the Interatron process, which is to put the video into what people are watching. What we found was, number one, is that people's eyes converge slightly differently when there's a person there as opposed to a camera. In a camera, they tend to look straight towards it. And with a person, they look at them. And it's just a really, really slight thing in their eyes that happens. The other thing is that people have this tendency to mimic each other. And so you'll do these things where someone else has put their eyebrows up, you're likely to. There's a dance that goes on when people are looking at each other clearly that you don't see when you can't see someone or you don't see them very well. And so that creates a feeling of connection, but it also changes the actual performance of folks that are there. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, your internet's falling apart. We're gonna have one of these days. Your video is great.
Yours is too.
So my video, my audio is coming apart.
You just had some micro stalls when you were talking.
Oh, and that's because I'm on Wi-Fi.
And
Sorry.
Bill, you're coming in about 3 or 4 dB too hot.
What I was going to say is typically we have 2 speakers and 1 screen. In a Dolby situation, you may have 10 speakers and 1 screen. So obviously audio is more important. And Alex is frozen and gone.
Oh, that's interesting. And somebody was telling me I was way too hot. So let me just check the meters. Oh gosh, I am hot. So this is one of those days when we just have a few technical issues to get around. But until Alex comes back and Wi-Fi settles up, I guess if there's no more hands up, we'll move on to the next question. So it comes in from Hasmuk in Cape Town, South Africa. I accessed mix effects from multiple devices on our LAN.
Second hour.
Oh, second hour. So it wasn't tagged. Oh, no, it is tagged, and somehow we missed it. Okay, so moving on to Jim Hankins' question. Let me see if I can move that over. No. Jim Hankins says, would Alex L be willing to share his initial impressions of the new AWS Elemental Link UHD pros or cons? But again, Alex is
Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, so let me see if I can find a question that'll succeed this morning. Rupert Cray of Dallas, Texas is up next with JLL is reporting a global shortage of skilled data center staff. So first chips go into production crisis, and now this. What will be the next global shortage during this time of digital transformation? Anybody want to predict what's going to happen here?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, you just arrived.
Sorry about that. That was my fault. Anyway, I was on Wi-Fi because I was testing the internet earlier with something else. So I turned my Ethernet off so I could test something on Wi-Fi. And then I was like, oh, I'll just turn Wi-Fi off, and there was nothing there I literally reached out for a rope that wasn't there. So anyway, sorry about that. So what else is going? I think we're gonna have shortages of everything. like I think the next 6 months are gonna be a wild ride as far as that goes. Go ahead, Jason.
There's also something I've noticed working in career and technical education, and that's really a shortage of just individuals that understand digital technology that aren't necessarily higher up individuals, so like white collar. So there really is like almost like a blue collar shortage of technical understanding for people. So when you have these problems in data centers, when you have these problems in local businesses, it's usually because they don't have anyone that can wander around and fix the little things because they don't know the nuts and bolts of the computer. They know what they want the computer to do, but they don't know the little nuts and bolts of things. And so what we need to do, and what we're in the process of transitioning in with education right now, especially is trying to get those new students that are graduating high school, that are graduating college, to take some of these entry-level jobs and to create these entry-level jobs at these local businesses to try and take care of these things.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, it's sort of production adjacent, but lumber is up 377% so far this year.
It's starting to drop. Starting to
Okay.
drop. Lumber's starting to go down.
Good. But all of those all those physical assets are up dramatically. So if you're building stuff, it's going to cost more.
Hey, go ahead, Chris.
Not all lumber. I just bought wood for more tall makers. And I paid 40% above normal.
Yeah, but it's starting to ease. It was incredibly high, and it's starting to kind of back away a little bit for that. But I think that we're going to see an incredible. The next 10 years is going to be fascinating. As you know, it's just a giant experiment that was created because a whole bunch of people moved from where they were to something that was less expensive. They now can work from those areas. Some people can, and some people can't. And so there's a whole lot of things that have shifted, and I think that we're just running into all the collisions that happen when millions of people around the world move somewhere else suddenly. Creates a massive shift in a lot of different things. Go ahead, Jason.
And again, I can tell you that I have a student who just actually got an internship with Lockheed Martin, and he's getting paid $25 an hour to do stuff because he is the one that's running around doing the little nuts and bolts and things for them in their IT department, because their IT department is such short staffed. But then not only that, there was also, if you take a look at the news stories, the IT departments have been hit most, or not most, but a lot by COVID because they had to stay in person and kind of work through some of this stuff. So you're starting to see a little bit of that kind of carry over, and these guys are kind of getting a little bit exhausted taking care of things as well.
The challenge for a lot of companies locally are going to be that the folks that are the most technically proficient can often work from home, and then now they have an entire globe to work for, and that's going to be from a talent perspective is going to be very complicated. Next question.
Moving on, Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois is up next with we continue to improve the quality of the panel. What are the thoughts on phasing out over-the-ear headphones in favor of in-ear monitors? Seems like some of them are large and distracting.
There'll be a point where it doesn't work anymore. It's not yet, but we're going to definitely recommend that people find in-ear monitors. I mean, we want it to look like a show, and so, but I think a lot of us have gone to in-ear monitors. Some people don't want to, so we'll see. We're not going to press anything really hard yet, but definitely at some point we'll prefer people to have not have headphones on. So it's little radio looking. Anyway, next
mine
question.
are on order.
Cool. Next question.
Nigel DeSau, Austin, Texas is next for a 6K Pro, Blackmagic 6K Pro camera. If you had to choose between the Canon EF 2470 f2.8 Mark I and an FS 1755 millimeter f2.8 lens, which would you pick and why?
I would tend to pick the 24-70 only because I know it well. I think we own like 10 of them at this point. So it's for what we're doing. It is the thing that we use the most. It's really, really strong glass, but it's only because I don't know the other lens. Go ahead, Carl.
If you're not intending on getting full frame ever, the 70-55 is as good because it is essentially the same focal range you're going to use for this kind of work, and it'll give you a bit wider angle. If you ever going to think about getting a full frame camera, or even like a 12K, which is a little bit larger than APS-C, its actual sensor size, then yeah, the 24-70. Version 1 is good. Version 2 is twice the price, but that's because it's twice as sharp.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think it entirely depends on your use case. If you are doing things like this kind of panel broadcast, I have a ridiculously too expensive lens behind here doing a job that it's way overqualified for. And if I didn't take that out and actually shoot photos with it pretty regularly, I think it would be a terrible investment on my part. These little things like the difference between the Mark I and the Mark II, they're subtle, they're real, and a serious photographer who's working every day will understand and appreciate those differences and leverage them into better results. But somebody who's sticking it on your desk to use for webcasting will never understand any of those differences, or really, I don't think even see them.
I just, when I invest in glass, I don't think about whether it's going to a webcast or not. I assume that it's going to be the nicest camera I have over the next 10 years. So, because that's how long I use the lenses. So I don't worry about, I think that oftentimes we make a mistake of throwing the, ball to where the receiver is instead of where they're going. And, all this, the quality of all these things will keep going up. Next question.
Jim Hankins is up next with, from Chesterfield, Michigan, by the way. Would Alex L. be willing to share his initial impressions of the new AWS Elemental Link UHD, pros and cons?
That's this little guy here. So I'm making a little video about this this week. They sent it to me to play with, and it is awesome. I mean, I think that that's the best way to describe it. There was a couple little things about changing formats on it and so on and so forth that we're working through, but those are just firmware issues. Overall, I think it's pretty impressive. So what makes it different is that it's a UHD 60, so it's 4K 60 uplink with 10-bit, 16 channels of audio. And I don't know of another encoder at $5,000. It's $5,000. I don't know of another encoder that does all of those things together. So being able to get a 10-bit, 16 channel, I haven't seen one. There might be one out there. I just haven't seen it. And then the other big advantage is that once you have it, it's cloud-based. And so you basically can send it to somebody, turn it on, and I see it in AWS, and I don't have to do anything with the encoder. And I think that the links were years in the making. So the first link we have 4 of the first link that we had an event in Chicago, and we just literally sent a bunch of little boxes out. And that used to be like an operator and big machinery and all kinds of other things, and someone who had to know how to use it. Now we needed someone to plug the SDI in somewhere on the far end. It uses Zixi as the transport, which is another requirement for me. That means that I'm going to get more reliable ingest into AWS. The downside is that if you're going to do it for 24/7 or you're going to do it long term, you're going to pay for it. So you're not streaming directly to Facebook or directly to YouTube or other things like that. You're streaming into AWS and then from there to whatever you want. Now you can stream to all of those things from AWS, but you'll pay for each one of those per hour. I mean, it's like 80 cents an hour or something, or $1.50 an hour if you're doing a UHD, I think. But it's not a huge number, but if you leave it on all the time, it'll start to add up to real numbers. So there's that. The other thing is that when you start up a job in AWS, you're waiting about 1 minute and 15 seconds, sometimes as long as 1 minute and 45 seconds for the UHD to get it out there. So you have to know that you need a little time to get off the ground. You're not going to start your encoder and see bits on the other end in 20 seconds. So you have to know that that's part of the process. So if you're doing something that does an auto start, which we don't do, but other people do, I don't like auto start because I like to know what I'm going to send out before I actually put it out in public. But for people who do the auto starts, it's going to take a little longer to come up to speed. It does also support things like 608, 708 captions, and so you can just have embedded captions into your SDI, and it'll just do what it needs to do with those. So it's a professional grade encoder. That the last 4K encoders that I bought were 100,000 each. So that was the retail MSRP. It was 100,000 each. So to get it for 5,000. Pretty slick. So I have a different perspective. And again, there are other encoders out there that do 4K. There's the Clearcaster, which is a great box. It's another what we call server defined encoder. So which means it's talking to the server. That's the cool thing about these, is that they're not very little's going on. You can go into it, log into it, and change its IP if you need to go to static for some reason in a firewall. But this one is just like DHCP. You just plug it in, plug the internet in, plug the video in, and then run it all from AWS, or have somebody else run it from AWS. And if you want someone else to run it, it takes like literally a minute to just send. Because I have a personal account on AWS, and then the company 090 has its own account. And so if we're using the links for 090, it goes over there. If I need it, I just pull it back over, and I can just move it from account to account relatively seamlessly. There are some things you need to know about that, as you need to move it into the right region, because it is regional. So, you might have to move it to a, different, from Oregon to, the Midwest or whatever. So those are things that you have to think about there. But anyway, it's a really slick box. We're most likely going to use it for the next generation of the office hours stuff. So this UHD box, one of the reasons I'm testing it is we're probably going to use it to do all of our encoding for Office Hours 2.0 as we go to HDR 4K. This is the box we'll most likely use for it. Next question.
Moving on, Tony Mobley's up next from Newman, Georgia. And Tony says, is anyone using Sidecar with the new iPad Pro 2021 M1 as an Ethernet connection?
Don't fully understand that. Sidecar is usually go ahead, Carl.
I think the question is using the iPad via Ethernet using Sidecar, because I know you can use the USB-C to Ethernet adapter, and so there is a way to actually just get Ethernet straight into your iPad, of course. But I think they're saying, without that adapter, can I just use sidecar, and with sidecar, will my iPad have access to the internet via Ethernet if you share your Ethernet via that port? I think that's what the question is trying to ask. I personally haven't tried that.
I guess I thought Sidecar is mostly using it as a second monitor for a main computer. So I don't know. Like once you go into Sidecar, I don't think you're really worried about it. The internet connection that of whatever is serving that is coming from the. Yeah, go ahead, Beju.
I think the issue might be that in some cases you need to have the Wi-Fi on specifically for some of because it's using AirPlay. Mm-hmm. So it might not be working if you have the Wi-Fi switched off and you're connected directly to the Ethernet adapter. So that might be the question, because I've seen that issue sometimes, that if you're trying to do AirPlay, it doesn't really like you going over Ethernet. It wants the Wi-Fi.
It'll always, I don't know. Yeah, it always prioritizes Ethernet once it gets it, because it assumes if you went through the trouble of plugging it into Ethernet, you probably want to use it. So that's and I don't even know how to change that priority, Bill.
I do think there's a little extra magic sauce in Sidecar as a technology, because I'm pretty sure you can still use the touch display for all the iOS touch stuff and integrate that into what essentially your computer sees. So I think the bidirectional communication is stronger there, but I don't have that system, so I don't use it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I like using Sidecar, but I have an iPad Pro, not the M1, the earlier version that has the LiDAR. When I have put a very high megapixel Photoshop file onto Sidecar, it wouldn't display. You get the Photoshop window, but the image would not display. So there's a certain limitation in the size of what can be displayed on there, at least with that iPad.
Next question.
Moving on, Beju, Gadya in India here on the panel. Anybody had the chance to test the Sound Devices Mixpre running noise assist versus the Universal Audio Apollo C-Suite V-Box CEDER noise and ambience reduction? Would be interesting to compare how well they work compared to each other.
Beju?
Yeah, Alex, this is more for you, because you've often mentioned in the past that CEDER is the gold standard and Mixpre is coming up very close to it. So now this plugin has been developed by CEDER. So I was really curious to see if you had a chance to test it.
How much is the plugin?
$300.
Yeah, it's $350, I think, and I'm right this close to buying it.
Well, the funny thing is that CEDER was so expensive.
I know
before, and it was always so expensive, and then I think Sound Devices kind of set the bar. Like, yeah, this is what the market's going to do now. So I haven't tested it yet. I don't have an Apollo, so I haven't been able to test that. It would be interesting to see someone who has both of those things test it. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I've always used CEDER with a sound person who knows how to run it on set, and it has sometimes worked absolute miracles. I mean, literally doing a CEO recording in a noisy office right below the main HVAC system, and used correctly, it just makes it all disappear. It's really a fabulous tool. So I'd be interested in seeing how it compares as well. And I may buy it just to check it out.
What I have noticed is that as I turn up the Sound Devices noise assist, what I don't hear is the quantization that I often hear inside of a CEDER when I turn it up too high. So I think that you can make mistakes with the Sound Devices noise assist more gracefully than you can with the CEDER. We've had problems where people turn the CEDER up too high and it immediately starts to block out.
You can hear it.
You can hear it. You can hear this digital thing that you don't tend to. I notice people will turn it up, and I might hear a little where it's kind of clamping the audio, but it's not turning into little audio squares, as I call them, little macro blocks of audio, which the CEDER tends to do when it's turned up too high. I haven't tested that plugin. Most of my experiences with the actual CEDER hardware, the DNS2 and the DNS8, and those, I know that when we turned them up past about 5 or 6, they had a strong tendency to do that. So that's my only experience between the two. I haven't ever gone, in an A/B test. Next question.
Moving on to Nathan GS. Thoughts on using the Behringer Flow 8, planning to use for an audio chain into an Atem Extreme, and also whether the SM7B would work with this without a cloudlifter.
Go ahead, Carl.
So I'm coming into you right now through a Flow 8. The microphone I have its sensitivity is -54. The sensitivity of the Shure is -59, so it's only 5 dB, a little bit quieter. I've tested the Flow 8 on my least sensitive microphone, which is -70, and that's where it still works, but I'm just right at the top there. So there's 11 dB space there for you at negative 59. So yes, you will be able to use it for talking like we are now, so not too loud. Not, music will be obviously easily, but yes, you will be able to use it in an office hour situation without a cloud lifter, with probably 11 to 12 dB to spare on the gain.
That's great. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, he says, with many audio and video vendors not having native support for Apple Silicon yet, is it the right time to transition to an Apple Silicon Mac?
I think, as Mickey would say, it depends. It depends on whether the software that you have is running on it. It's not, I think, running natively. We've seen a lot of the software run relatively well, just not natively. Go ahead, Carl.
If you're within the Apple ecosystem, Final Cut Pro, Logic, those kind of things, then yes, that's obvious. If you're in the world like Adobe and other things, and Adobe is saying they've got support coming, then maybe wait until that support is there. But yeah, so that'd be probably the line in the sand at the moment.
Beijing.
Yeah, it's I think more of an issue for people who are in audio, because a lot of the plugins have not been ported over, are not supported. So a lot of people I know, like one of the people I have, we just bought one of the Intel Macs specifically to get them over the next couple of years till native support for the M1 series comes in, because they're not sure about when they're going to get the transition in, and especially because they're using Dante, which is again more of an issue unless if you need to use virtual sound card, because that's not supported as well right now.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, was reading a discussion on the economic issues of virtual concerts, and what they said, virtual concerts have less economic impact because fewer sounding and lighting crews are needed. Wouldn't a stream need the same crew even if the audio is going to an encoder?
Go ahead, Carl.
So less economic impact means they're cheaper to run. I'd say they would be cheaper, but not a lot cheaper, because if they're still doing a big production, it's still going to be a big production. There is a live aspect though. So you don't need to worry about doing a line array of speakers to a crowd. So that's one thing you can cut out of your costs.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's also the amount of people per viewer. So that, if you get some of the stuff that we're working a lot in concerts right now, thinking about it or doing tests. And one of the things that we're looking at is, well, I could play this out to, when you play out to a venue, you have to rent that venue out. You have to load all those things into the venue, and you're taking a risk. Are we going to get 20,000 people or 15,000 people? And if more than 15,000 want to show up, which is usually the case, then when a venue sells out in a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, what you've done is left an enormous amount of money on the table. So that's I mean, from a promoter's perspective, you want to sell the last ticket. Like, you want to sell enough to, 70,000 tickets in the first minute. That's great. But you want to send the last tickets right before the show. Like, you got everything out of it that you could from a revenue perspective. And that's not what happens. So when 70,000 people buy it, there could have been 300,000 or 500,000 or a million people that were willing to pay that, so the demand was much higher than the supply. And so the issue is that, and then you have the bands don't want to charge everybody $300 a ticket. That's what you could do. And some bands have. Some bands just go, well, it'll be $200 a ticket and it'll sell slower, but we'll make a lot more money. There's bands like Pearl Jam that want to charge everybody $20 a ticket, but they can't do that because the math doesn't make sense. So what virtual streaming potentially could do is provide an almost unlimited number of viewers for the same amount of resources expended on the stage, and so and those resources will be much smaller because it's much less lights and much, what you have to do to support an entire venue like a stadium is much different than what you have to do to do a stage. And there is still an open question about whether the big stage feel is required either. What a lot of people at home want to see, or even in a theater, is a more personal experience with the band. So what people really respond to in those environments is feeling like they're like a unplugged almost experience. Is something that a lot of people seem to want, with a discussion and a process, and it's a different kind of feel. But it means that a small venue can typically leverage enormous amounts of viewers, and especially if you're a niche artist that may have millions of followers all over the world, but is hard to find 200 in one place. Like that's those are some of the big advantages. And I think that virtual concerts are going to, I've had the opportunity to think about it for the last year, and really hard for the last 3 months. And I think they're going to be a really big deal. They're going to be the thing. for a lot of the bands, a lot of the big bands. I mean, there's large bands looking at this fall of doing a show for 1 million people, all at one time, and with nobody in the audience, in the physical audience. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Oh, I was just going to add, to me, it's always that sticky wicket, not only as a performer, but also as a person that's been in the crowds there. My best experiences were to watch people like Billy Joel and Eric Clapton. I was at that Eric Clapton concert when Stevie Ray Vaughan passed away. So that holds a very big thing in my heart. That event right there, and I'll remember it till the end of time. Virtual concerts, not as much. To answer the question, there's still union. So it's whatever the unions dictate. They need to run a stream, and how many people that will run. And there's no way around that. So
it depends on the venue. If the source venue is union, then that makes a difference. But the thing is that as soon as you say we're going to stream and we're not going to have a bunch of people, the options for venues increases dramatically. And so the thing is that they're not all union. So that becomes kind of a where does it start? And then the big thing is that you're absolutely right that there has to be some shared experience. We're not talking about streaming a show. I think a virtual concert can be a stream, but it can also be going to other venues. So like we have 15,000 theaters 15,000 screens in the United States. Most people think that will be down to about 3,000 screens by 2030. So that are being used for film, because there's not going to be the same demand. Streaming is changing the way we make films. It's changing the way people go to films. COVID kind of broke that whole model. And so it's just going to, 80% of the number of screens is going to drop. That's what most people think. What do you do with the rest of the screens? Concerts is one of the things that you could do, where you can watch something with actually much better audio with 1,000 people. And if you set up a fiber relay back and forth, or even Zoom, but if you set up a relay away for the folks in the audience, literally the band can see everybody in that audience at the same latency as they would see it in the stadium. In a stadium, you have to remember that you lose the latency for each leg on Zoom is about 200 milliseconds, 240 milliseconds. And that's 240 feet, so that's X number of rows out, so it's, maybe 60 rows out. That's the same latency, that you have. So the band can actually get a lot of response and tie people together, and potentially tie people together globally. Where a band can walk up and see a big screen. It's one of the things that I'm excited about when we look at like the immersive design systems, or that Monterey's putting in, is a band could walk up there and go, hello Pittsburgh, hello Montreal, hello London, and have people cheering, and they can respond to them and do all kinds of things, and that whole audience is global. But they still could theoretically have people singing and clapping, and probably not lighters in the theater, but most of the other things that we would do, we can do in those areas. Go ahead, Jason.
We also have to start paying attention to things like what Fortnite has been doing with Travis Scott and Marshmello. Fortnite has 350 million people on their platform, and they have tens of millions of people that pop into their virtual concerts. And because of COVID and because of the kids getting used to this coming up in the next 10 years, they're already starting to get used to virtual concerts. They don't understand the big in-person experience. So it's just something we got to keep in mind, that a lot of the people that are coming up in the next 5 to 10 years aren't going to understand this whole big concert experience. They're going to understand the virtual immersive experience much more deeply.
And I've worked, attached to music. I used to work for Sony Music, and then I was a music director and program director. I spent a lot of time backstage, and I could always tell you whether a band was on the front end or the tail end of a tour. The first 10 or 15 shows is really exciting for the band. They're in front of a lot of people. They're super excited. The last 10 or 15, they're just surviving. They're not. There's no longer. They've been. They're just beaten. And so bands looking. We have to look at this as a business. And the bands want to perform live. Do they want to do 55 shows? Maybe. Some of them might, but most of them would prefer to just get to the same number of people with the same revenue on a handful of shows. As opposed to doing it some other way. Some bands will be traditional. There's also bands that are very sensitive to video and so on and so forth. So it just depends. Next question.
Moving on, we're going to Brimer, I'm sorry. And Barry says, a nonprofit providing one-on-one reading classes for children needs an easy Zoom registration. It will be 25 to 350 students, one-on-one classes per day. And he's got a link there that Grant Whitehead from Office Hours provided. Does that do this, Obvio?
It could. One-on-one is a complicated thing, Bill.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that because my wife spent about a year doing distance English as a second language education, as a first language, really, for students in China. So she was doing tele-teaching one-on-one. It was a fascinating experience. There are elements about it that work. There were elements about it that were very challenging. And the infrastructure that this woman, I believe, in China put together to do this, and they had 20, 30, 40,000 students around the world being taught English via basically their version of Zoom. The technical issues are not trivial. They had a whole series, a cadre of technical help people, so that if in the moment when you're doing your one-on-one something goes wrong, somebody has to be available to troubleshoot that at distance. So it's not a trivial thing to build out a large-scale one-on-one teaching or counseling service like this. I just be careful going into it. It's going to require a lot of time and effort and investment to do it right.
Yeah, I think that I would talk to Grant about that, because it might work. Obvio may work. You do need, I think you're going to need some kind of web interface that's going to activate the Zoom meetings for you. One-to-one is a lot of those, but there could be a way that someone can basically be registered into a web page. They go up, they're hitting an entry button. That entry button is spawning a Zoom. I mean, that's what a lot of what Obvio does. It'll spawn those Zooms and let you jump into them. So it actually could work well, but he would be the best person to answer that question. But I think that you do need some kind of Zoom interface, some kind of web interface to manage Zoom. I don't think you'll be able to do it in the core app. Next question.
Moving on, this comes from Marius in Johannesburg, South Africa. Zoom seems to have a great support for using green screen. Webex has nothing at all. Is there some software that will allow me to key my video before piping it to Webex or Zoom?
I have to admit that question makes me almost want to use Webex. I wish I could turn it off. If you're watching here, I have a strong distaste. I think a lot of us have learned to have a strong distaste for virtual backgrounds. So it's not that you can't use them. And in fact, if you look at earlier shows, I was using one. I went to a gray background for myself, and I'll build a set back here at some point. But right now, just a gray background works. I believe that the keying process. So one of the things that we want to look at is people being able to be present and only listening to you and thinking about what you're saying and being able to have an authentic communication. And so when we have bad audio and we have bad video and we have other things that are distracting, it's not that you complain about it, it's not that you notice it consciously, but it's adding load to your brain. So you're trying to remove, when we talk about having great audio and great video and great lighting and good internet and all those things, what we're trying to do is reduce the load on the participant, so that and some of that is a subconscious load. So we want to, for instance, one of the things that we try to do is have a lot of our panelists pay attention, like look at us and do stuff and not do other things, and not wander around and not do other, because that's a distraction. Do people complain about it? No. But is something that catches their eye and has them look over at that and it creates a cognitive load, and it means that they're not listening at the full rate that they could, or that they could be part of something. And so, and that is what contributes to what I think people call Zoom fatigue or virtual event fatigue, is all this. And one of the things that I think contributes heavily to that are virtual backgrounds, because they create a really nasty looking edge, which you have to ignore. Like you just have to ignore it all the time. And it really is something that your brain is constantly ignoring. So it's like, I'm not looking at that. 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 You're being on Wi-Fi and having it break up. I'm not listening to that. I'm not listening to that. Bad audio and echoey rooms. I'm not listening to that. I'm not listening to that. It adds a huge amount of cognitive load that makes people tired. We can do this for a long period of time because we don't. Now, if you want a good green screen, the best green screen that you can get is the best is the Ultimate from Blackmagic, but the second best that you can readily acquire is what is in every Atem Mini, whether it's Extreme or the basic, is that the keyer that's built into that hardware is by far the best. And the reason you want to key it there and not in software is because it's still uncompressed as it goes through. Now it is 422 and not 444, but it is, which is a whole nother conversation, but you will have a little bit of damage to it on the way through at 1080p, but it's going to be the best key that you can get from a software perspective. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, totally agree. Always key before you go into Zoom, whether it be hardware or software, of course, hardware being the more important one. And the other thing is, yeah, if you do have to have a background, the better background would be something that's completely neutral. Maybe if it's like something like you have a company or anything like that, have where the logo can be right here, but a nice dark background as the supposed virtual background with the logo would be perfect. Don't do like the San Francisco scene that you get off of Zoom, because it's just the perspective is off.
Yeah. So one of the things you want to look at is when I do, for a while I had a virtual background, and if you go back and look at it, one of the things I did is I matched my camera position, I matched my focal length, I matched all of those things. When I took I actually created the background that I put behind me, and I matched all those things because, again, people don't notice it and they don't talk about it, but having an improper focal length for what they're seeing, so you are in a different focal length from something else, is adding cognitive load to what they're doing. It's part of the problem with virtual backgrounds is that they're adding load to what you're doing, and subconsciously, and it makes people tired. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just to throw this out there, Ken Jordan on our panel today is the one who really got me to change my background to this. Before, I used to have it like this, and it was, you can see it's just different. It becomes chaotic a little bit more. And what I noticed is that my eye would constantly go to Ken whenever we were in gallery view. And the reason why my eye went to Ken in gallery view was because he was so cleaned up and looked so nice. He had that color, and then it focused directly to him and his facial features. So Ken, by the way, huge shout out to you. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas is up next. And Rupert says, do we think Apple will really release an Apple sound bar and with a built-in camera like a Neat Bar or a Logitech Rally Bar? And there's another sentence, but it doesn't make sense to me. So I think that's enough to get the question.
I think if Apple's going to enter the market, they're going to enter this particular market. So this has 6 woofers, 7 tweeters, and the 7 tweeters are actually arranged. So they're top facing, side facing, and forward facing. This gives you the Atmos experience from a single soundbar. So it's an all-in-one, which Apple like, but it gives you the experience. If Apple can get this at around $1,000 US, then it's game on.
Because the Sennheisers, I think that's 2,500, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what the slide said.
Yeah, and it's I've heard, I haven't heard it personally, but I've heard that it's 80-90% of having the speakers there themselves. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So Apple's already done the HomePod, and they discontinued that. They did the HomePod Mini, which is where they're soon to go. I think instead of a soundbar, they're just going to release a HomePod subwoofer and bring that into the HomePod Mini environment, and maybe even do a four HomePod Mini pair to get a full 5.1 or 7.1 type sound, or spatial audio, whatever you want to call it.
I think that would be complicated with the. I have some of the HomePod Minis, and I have a HomePod, and I know that TJ, who's not here today, often stated he has 2 HomePods that he tested, and he has also discrete speakers, and he said that the 2 HomePods were very close to his speaker setup, so they actually paired fairly well. I wouldn't be surprised. The first thing I would do if I was going to put out a sound bar is I would discontinue the HomePod that I had to clear the to clear the channel. So step 1 may have already happened. Next question.
Moving on, Jason Sipe of Murrieta, California says Zoom 5.7.0 states participants are notified when live streaming through an NDI device begins, providing them the option to consent or leave the meeting. How many and how many of the panelists integrate NDI into their Zoom workflow?
I don't know how many people here. We definitely have people that are in our panel often days that do that. That integrate those, that integrate NDI. I know George Kennedy does a fair bit of it. Guy Cochran and Grant Whitehead also does it. So there are a handful. There are definitely people who do it, and it's fairly useful, especially as it goes into the cloud. So when you're trying to get video sources around inside of AWS, it becomes super useful to have NDI. so that's where, and it's been a strong request for a lot of people who are doing cloud production to be able to get those feeds out. And so I think that's been a place where it's been very, very popular. Next question.
Comes from Hector Rodriguez of Springfield, Virginia. And Hector says, connected a Zoom Room device to a Dante network. In Dante controller, it shows only as a receiver with 8 channels, no transmitter. Is this normal or am I missing something?
It would depend on what the device is. If it's some kind of device, I don't even know how it's connecting to Dante. like I don't know what's happening there. If it's a PC or Mac, you should be able to get back and forth, in and out of it. So if it's you'd have to define what device you're connecting. Again, I'm surprised that it sees anything if it's a Dante. If it's we just need to know more about what the device is. Next question.
Comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Any good source? What's a good source for a large 14-foot by 9-foot curtain as for a backdrop? Any color suggestions?
Go ahead, Carl.
So Commando cloth curtains from Chicago Canvas would be my suggestion. Free shipping, and you get to pick your color. And they actually make them curtain pre-made. It's not just fabric; they actually make them as a curtain in Commando cloth.
Go ahead, Bill.
Rose Brand Fabrics. If you search Rose Brand, you will find they are theatrical suppliers of everything, every possible type of curtain in every possible size. They do the biggest venues in the world, and they also do small orders. That's where my curtain from my studio came from.
I think I've probably spent $50,000 to $100,000 in Rose Brand in the last decade. so it's definitely where we go to get backdrops at scale. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, the one I use is actually an IKEA blind, roller blind, and in grey. So that's another option from IKEA.
Next question.
Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. Alex, can you give a brief Zixi 101 primer, especially its relevance or lack thereof to non-corporate or very large production houses?
So actually, Zixi is much more for production houses than it is for corporate. I'll give you a very quick 101 given our time frame, but it is basically it's a UDP, it's reliable UDP, and it is related to SRT, except that it is a bit of more of a bully. Like it wants to make sure that it gets all of the bits across, and it's probably a little bit more, we found to be a little bit more resilient to bandwidth changes. So one of the things that Zixi does really effectively is it not only does it make sure that all the packets get from one side to the other, ignoring many rules of the internet to do that, but it also, it tends to fluctuate with bandwidth very effectively, more effectively in our experience than SRT. So all things equal, with equal bandwidth, with bandwidth not fluctuating, SRT and Zixi are pretty much the same, from our perspective. When we see heavy fluctuations, especially as they go down into the 1 or 2 meg range, we find that Zixi's ability to manage that, especially strong fluctuations, tends to be higher than SRT. And it comes at a price because it does that. But that's been the case for us, at least over the last couple of years that we've seen between the two. We'll see SRT break up a little bit where Zixi just about, you really have to have an internet problem to have Zixi break up. Go ahead, Beju.
Alex, have you compared how Zixi works again, how well Zixi works compared to LRT from LiveView? Because LiveView also does something similar in their LRT protocol.
And we haven't. We've used live views, a lot of live views, and I don't know when LRT was put into them. I can definitely tell you that Zixi is more reliable than live views. so like up till a couple years ago. Again, we had 2 live views on lease for almost 10 years, and so we would definitely see Zixi manage bandwidth when live views were having trouble. So that, but I don't know when LRT was introduced by LiveView and whether that affects what we're doing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, would there be a way to import a design from CAD software like Vectorworks into Unreal Engine to create pre-visualizations or full virtual productions from it?
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
So I don't know about that particular software, but there's a wide range of CAD packages that Unreal supports through their DataSmith plugin. So you need to go into your plugins and load Datasmith, and then you'll have a bunch of options.
Go ahead, Jason.
Vectorworks released Service Pack 3. I'm actually adding that link right now into the chat in Mukana, and you are able to import CAD drawings using Datasmith in real time into Unreal.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a pretty direct connection. And if for some reason your software doesn't go directly into Unreal, you can always export it out as an OBJ or a variety of other formats to get it into there. It's cleaner. The Datasmith connection is much cleaner than an external package, but there are many external packages that are going, OBJ, a whole variety of them. OBJ is the kind of the old fashioned, kind of gets into everything, but not very well. But it's one way to kind of pass things back and forth. USDZ again will most likely become more and more prevalent across the industry, not just because of Apple, but because it's just a superior format to almost everything else. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back again with what specific aspects of the MA Lighting Grand MA23 consoles make them more popular in the concert non-theatrical market than other markets and other competing brands?
Other than ETC, I think is what he said.
Oh.
Than ETC, which is the we want to try to read those direct. So the ETC is the other brand. So the I don't know. I think it's a lot of these things. I mean, someone may here be able to jump in. Usually Talak would be the right person to ask this question. So if you see him, you can bring this question up again because he's the one that deals with it the most. Beju?
I think part of it is the install base and the familiarity. Like a lot of concert venues, a lot of lighting people who are working on concerts and large events, they're familiar with the Grandma consoles. So a lot of time the requirement when they're setting up an equipment list or when they have that, they want a Grandma console. I know local people locally who specifically bought it because when they get touring acts come in, the requirement is they want Grandma. They don't care if you have owl lights or anything else. They want the Grandma because they have the show set up in it. It's also extremely flexible. But what it can do with it, it has a big learning curve, but it is extremely flexible. And the other thing they have compared to a lot of the other ones is they have a node-based system. You can add extra nodes to add extra processing for the DMX and the ArtNet. So if you need to scale up a large show with lots more lights fixtures, you can add extra processing nodes to do the extra processing for that. So your main console isn't overloaded, which is one of the interesting things with it.
Yeah, and it very much could be scale. And what I have seen, and I guess it's mostly what I've done for whatever it is the Grand MA consoles are what we're used to seeing at a venue, where for what we're doing, we almost exclusively, that's what we see, and a lot of these things happen culturally, so something got into a system, it became a group of people liked it. And suddenly it became kind of a standard. I mean, one of the things that we see this all over the place, where the standards they're just slightly better for one thing than another. So for instance, broadcast, we see a lot of MADI. So when we're dealing with broadcasters, there's MADI. That's how broadcasters pass stuff around. And it's been around a lot longer. And so it's simpler. You don't need the same level of IT understanding and everything else to pass it. So there's a bunch of reasons for broadcast that makes sense. They don't want to think about all the IT infrastructure required to support it. But they also don't need to do things that are nearly as complicated. When you get into event companies, all you see is Dante. So basically, if we go to a show, everybody speaks Dante. If we go to a broadcast, everybody speaks MADI. And then there's a handful of people that know the difference between the two and can bridge those. And then, of course, there's a variety of different tools that are used to bridge those back and forth, to get them in and out. But a lot of that comes down to they have slight advantages. And sometimes it's not huge advantages, but they are, broadcast tends to be less IT. And now broadcast is moving probably away from that. MADI I think MADI will most likely go away as we move away from baseband. Because MADI can be transported over SDI, or a BNC, not SDI, but BNC. And so as everybody in broadcast, for instance, needs to be more IP driven because of 2110, we'll most likely see Dante, continue to move forward, or other formats. So that's just another example. Same thing with the Grand MA versus ETC. It comes down to culturally, and I think Beju really outlined some of the scalability and flexibility things. I think ETC is simpler from what I've heard then grandma made a learn. so if you have if you have a high turnover rate, if you have less skilled operators, if you have, all of those things tend to lean people more towards something that's a little simpler to use. Next question. Angelo Jack has our last regular question from Brooklyn, New York. And Angelo asks, does any on the panel have an opinion on the AtomX, AtomX CAST product? Go ahead, Carl.
So essentially what they've done here is they've added a dock to the Atem, the Ninja, essentially. So the Ninja screen, that's a recorder as well. This allows you to have 4 in, 1 out. It's essentially, it looks like it parodies with the Atem Mini Pro because it can stream out of their USB-C. So it has that feature. It has terrible audio. So it just has a mic jack. So it's like a DSLR audio level, which is a bit bad.
So what you're saying is just like an Atem Mini.
It's an Atem. It isn't but here's the kicker. So for the same money, you can get the Video Assist 7-inch, the 3G version, and which is a HD version, and you can get the Atem Mini Pro, and that will give you quite a crazy combination because that has XLR in, which you can then pump that back into, of course, into the Atem Mini. So you get XLR inputs so it has a screen and a switcher. That's what we're looking at, screen and a switcher. This is a dock switcher essentially. So the Atem Video Assist, so the Atem Mini Pro and the Blackmagic Video Assist together, the 3G version, that is a much better combo because it gives you XLR. It gives you the ability to stream and to webcam simultaneously because you can send program out of the Atem switcher into the Video Assist. That has a USB which can do webcam, and the USB in the Atem itself can do the actual streaming. So it's so much more flexible to go the Blackmagic route, but it's kind of good to see other companies, trying.
Yeah. I mean, it looks very compact and very easy to do. And I think that there are definitely a handful of places where having something that's super compact that just all fits on your camera, or fits on a couple cameras and you can throw it together makes sense. As we get more refined, in this is kind of, these easy all-in-one are kind of the fast food of live streaming, broadcast. And I'll keep on underlining my basic belief that it is easy to make good content or easy to watch it, but rarely both. And we just want to, when we think about, okay, this will be really easy and really small and really whatever, are we making something that is really a great experience for our end user? And a lot of times just watching a camera or watching a handful of cameras that are poorly placed. And usually what comes with this is kind of a haberdashery way of approaching the project. And so I think that that's the thing that we want to, constantly, take into account. Now we have, we will be switching here in a second. I think we're just waiting for Adam Toe to pop up here. There we go. Look at that. Here he is. It was just like you mentioned him and he's there. So we're switching gears now. We've got a lot of questions lining up for Adam. So I think he's probably had time to look at him a little bit, but we're going to start out a little bit with Adam. Tell us a little bit about your background before MixFX Pro. How did you get into all of this? How long have you been programming?
So my history with Apple goes way back. So I started using the Apple II back in the day. My first Mac was an SE30. And then when I went to college, I had a PowerBook 180 and an Apple Newton. And that's kind of when the Apple Newton came out, I was like, God, this is the future. Everyone's going to have these mobile devices in the future. I remember studying in Paris during my junior year, and I was in the subway and I had my Newton. And I was like taking notes with the stylus and stuff like that. And I'm thinking everyone's going to be using this in the future. But everyone at the time were like reading little pocket books, or they're reading the newspaper. And now, everyone has a computer in their pocket. So I was very much interested in kind of mobile computing. And that's when I graduated. I actually had a software company that wrote software for the Newton. And then obviously, in 1998, Apple canceled the Newton project. I was actually the organizer of the Newton protest that was held at Apple campus in February, I believe, which incidentally was also Tim Cook's first day at Apple. He wrote about that in like a bio from Bloomberg or Business Week. I forget which one. So after that, I did a stint at Palm, and then I worked kind of like the web development and digital photography space for a long time. Around 2007, I developed a little website at the time called All Things D. It was run by Walt Mossberg and Kara Swisher, and became a very influential online media organization. And then since then, I've been working at Recode, which was bought by Vox Media, and I run the I'm the tech lead at the events team. So I do a lot of the in-person events, not this past year, but a lot of virtual events. And now we're just getting started back into the, in-person and hybrid events.
And
So-
how did you, so, and tell us a little bit about what Mix FX Pro is designed to do. And
Yeah.
how you-
So
how
when
it
I
can-
first, at the beginning of the pandemic, I bought an A10 Mini Pro. So, and I was like, wow, this
As
is
we all
pretty
did.
cool.
As
As
fast
we
as
all
we
did.
could.
And I quickly realized, okay, there's some things you can do on the hardware device, but there's some things that you need to do in ATEM software control on the Mac. And I was like, why can't I do these things on my phone or my iPad? Especially something like the downstream keyer, right? So I just popped that on and I popped that off, but downstream keyer didn't exist on the physical A10 Mini Pro. So
The button
initial
didn't exist.
genesis-
So the keyer
the
was there,
button.
but yeah, exactly.
Right, but you had to go into ATEM software control, and the interface, if you're not used to it, is kind of daunting.
Mhm.
So the first the idea for MixFX started out as a keying application, a way to kind of do chroma and luma keying and bring in like titles and stuff like that. And then one of the buttons on the software interface was a downstream keyer button. But as I started developing the app, I said, hey, maybe I can actually replace ATEM software control with a complete solution for iPads and iOS and bring basically the idea of ATEM software control native to a mobile device so that if you're working a show, you don't have to be stuck at the desk. I've done enough events, with all things D and code that, you always see the tech director, he's like at his desk with like stream decks and like computers and stuff, and he can't move. But I want to see like, what if you could move? And that's kind of how MixFX came to be.
And why don't we, before we go too much further, we have a lot of questions stacking up, and I think this is going to be a really question heavy one. There's a lot of users that are already using, I didn't really announce MixFX Pro very well at the very beginning because so many of us know what it is, because so many of us are already using it, but it's just such a great package. I have it sitting right next to me. So but do you want to show us a little bit of MixFX Pro just for the folks who
Sure.
haven't seen it?
So this is the app. If you're used to ATEM software control, the interface will probably look very familiar. We have a series of switcher sections on the left. So we have audio. You saw the switcher page. We have macros. So it lists all the macros here. What's great about this is that you can actually do a search and it'll filter your macros. You can also add icons to macros and give it a color. So if I wanted to give a color like, just use my finger, save. And now that macro is in red, and you can show them in like list or grid mode. Grid mode is something you're familiar with, and then list mode.
And are you able to upload your own icons, or are those pre-built?
These are icons from Apple's SF symbols. So they have like hundreds of icons that you can choose from.
That's great.
So you also have the media section. So if we take a look at, let me actually see if this works here. I'm gonna change this. So you see my background changed on my super source background, but if I can just like tap, I can change it to this one, or maybe this one be a little bit more visible. Let's see, let's drag this over here. So you can also upload media. You just tap the plus button, and then you can choose an image in your media library. You have transitions. So all the things that you're used to, mix, dip, wipe, and DVE. If you have Stinger support in your switcher, that will appear as well. So MixFX will only show you the features that your switcher supports. So if your switcher doesn't have super source, for instance, you won't see the super source section down here. But if it does, you'll have that. You have your upstream keyers. So you can just quickly use, I'm on a iPad Pro with a Magic Keyboard. So you can just switch to here and just hit a command, oops, not that one, to bring things on air. You have access to the downstream keyer, the super source, which I was showing you earlier. So I can just tap here to switch sources. And what's great about the super source is I can just like unlock it and this move it around with my finger, or like make it smaller with my finger. And then a simple tap just brings it back to the what you had saved. If you use color generators a lot, there's a great interface where you can just like drag stuff.
And this is really more, in a lot of ways, this is much more than just doing what ATEM software does on the Mac. it is taking advantage of all the other iOS services or many other iOS services to augment what the switcher can do.
Definitely. There's features that I have like for shortcut support. So for instance, I can just tap this and it'll bring in the DSK Auto logo. So what's interesting is that shortcuts, which is an application on iOS that lets you build kind of like little programs or scripts, it has conditional support. So programming logic. So if you're used to things like you want to do like if the still image that's currently in media player 1 is not the logo that I want to display, then I will make it disappear. And then I will set the media player image to the one that I want and then make it appear. Otherwise, if it's already the image, it will just toggle it and make it disappear. So it can do things that, quite frankly, macros can't do, because macros are just like a series of actions.
And a lot of switchers can't do. I mean, there's the interesting thing here is that as we're thinking about this a lot as we think about the future of office hours, is the idea of using the constellation, but routing things in and creating software solutions for things that a human being couldn't do and the hardware doesn't support. And it seems like your software is really on the front end of that.
Yeah, definitely. I want to basically do things with the Atem that I couldn't do with Atem software control. And so and there's a whole ecosystem of apps that are out there for Atems, like John Barker's Here to Record, Mix Effect and a variety of other things. You're just taking it to the next level.
No, that's great. It's fantastic.
So real quick, just like output. So if I was streaming, I could see all this stuff. I can set all my streaming destinations. I can see what my, stream key is. I could record the stream. I can capture stills or see my time code. And finally, like settings. So, I have split audio set on my microphone 1. If I have a hyperdeck, I can configure my hyperdeck right here. I don't have it on right now because it makes way too much noise. And then, one cool thing is that the multi-view, you can just configure your multi-view straight from this interface here in a nice kind of way. Just tap which one you want.
That's great.
And then if you have, the Atem Mini Extreme is great because it has 2 outputs, aux outputs. So I have one set to my multi-view and then the other one is set to my Mac, so I can see you. I don't have to look back and forth and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of what Mix Effect does.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's and just even you going through that showed me a bunch. My brain started going, oh, there's about 6 other things I think I could do with this, and so it's great. I think we're going to jump into the questions relatively quickly because there's so many stacking up right now for it. There's a lot of people that are pretty excited about this. So go ahead and Bill, what do we got?
Cosmic starts from Cape Town, says, I accessed Mix Effects from multiple devices on our LAN, iPhone, iPad, and M1 Mac Mini. Can this be an issue?
It can be an issue if you have more than 5 devices. So most Atem switchers have a connection limit of things that can control it of 5. So if you have Atem software control, Mix Effect on an M1 Mac, on an iPad, on an iPhone, and maybe Companion, you may run into that limit where you suddenly can't connect one of the apps if the Atem gets confused and tries to hold on to a connection that's no longer there. So keep that.
So
it's
not just the number of things that have connected to the Atem, but how many have connected to it recently. So it may try to hang on to a connection that's not there.
I have seen that in the past. So
unfortunately, yeah.
So I'm like, why is it not connecting? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm counting all the connections, and maybe let's turn everything off. Let's shut down Companion, close Atem software control, and then the Mix Effect will reconnect. Sometimes it gets to the point where you have to restart the switcher because it's just in the state. And I think a lot of people have seen Atems, they're great and very reliable, but sometimes you get in a state where you just got to power cycle them.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with multi-tenancy. Most of the times when we see stability issues with the Atem of it doing something we don't expect, it's because we have so many things connected to it. Like for instance, I have to be careful because the Mix Effects Pro here can attach through my VPN to our constellation in the office. And so, but it also connects mostly to my Mini Extreme. So I have to constantly check which one I'm connected to so I don't start, accidentally programming a show somewhere else. Yeah, you can see
one good thing about Mix Effects that you can create a whole set of switchers that you have connected to. So when I was developing it, Blackmagic actually loaned me a bunch of switchers. So I had like a Broadcast Studio 4K, a Constellation here on my desk, and then Production Studio 4K. So I don't have them now, but now it's just my Mini, Extreme ISO, and my Mini. But if you had like, 10 switchers, you could have them all listed here and just with one tap reconnect to it.
And that's an interesting point that you show. This is not something that Blackmagic doesn't feel, there's no competition with their software. Their software is there to make it basically operational, but it seems like they're supporting you on doing this.
Yeah, they've been very helpful in again, giving out loaner equipment. So I think, just look at how they kind of promote their SDK. They just want developers to kind of create solutions for their products.
It is a key reason that I'm so committed to our hardware being Blackmagic, is specifically not just because they make the API available, but they actively support and encourage people to customize their hardware with software. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I will note though that Mixeffect is not using the official SDK for the switcher because that's only available for Mac and Windows.
Got it. So and can you talk about how you're doing that?
Sure. So there was an open source project called Swift Atem. It's out up on GitHub, and it basically created the underlying networking protocol to communicate back and forth between the switcher. But it lacked a lot of the commands. So I spent many months kind of basically implementing, I would say like 90% of the commands of the switcher. And that's what's used in Mixeffect Pro right now.
Are there things that are problematic that you haven't been able to reproduce?
So I think because I don't understand the underlying networking, I kind of understand it at the high level, but that stuff goes beyond kind of like my programming expertise. So the things like the connections, is there a way to kind of keep the Atem connected when I go to the background? So for instance, if I'm using Mixeffect here, but then I say, oh, I need to go send like an email, and I switch out and I do something for like maybe 10 seconds and I come back, then, the Atem has disconnected the connection and you have to reconnect. That's not so much of a Swift Atem issue. It's much more of an iOS background limitation.
Right.
So, but I know that the switcher needs to talk constantly with the controller. And if it doesn't receive any data, it's going to just like drop it. That's why if you're on a Mac, Atem software control is always just running in the background. So you're always connected, right? But on iOS, you have to be concerned, or you have to be just taking in mind that, if you go away, chances are you'll be disconnected and you'll have to reconnect.
Well, and I have to admit, Mixeffect Pro has become so important to me that I have an iPad that's all it does. There's nothing else on it. It's not connected. The only thing it's connected to, it has become the interface to my Extreme. Simply because I need, what I will say is specifically with the Super Source, it's given me so much flexibility that I didn't have before, that it became just, it was an older iPad that I was already, and it works great. And I just didn't have to, for your point, I didn't want it to switch in and out of anything. So it just, that's the thing that it does. I just see it as another interface, for that piece.
Right.
Next question.
Comes to us from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Could you explain how to set up chroma key colors with Mixeffect Pro?
Sure. So let's bring this back up. I have an example here. So you can take a look at, so in the upper right of my Super Source, I have the like a green screen. And so you could go to the upstream keyer and you tap chroma. Let's look at number 3. And then you could tap on this little preview thing, and then you can move this the little square around. You can make the cursor bigger. I think you can see it. Move it to the actual.
And that's creating the sample area, right, of what it's going to use to grab its sample.
It is. So this is actually going on Media Player 2 right now, which is the background image. So let's switch back to this one here, and then you'll see it a little bit better. So let's switch this to Media Player 2. So go to the upstream key. Now that's Media Player 2 is also acting as the background for my super sources, which is why everything turned green. But as you drag this around, you see that it's green, and then you can just set that as your image.
Is there any way for you that you could explicitly set that color as opposed to sampling something within the image? Is the Atem capable of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I have a shortcut here, which you can see here, which is let's see, chroma title. Okay, so you can run an action that's get chroma sample, and then it will return you the YCBCR values, and then you could add that to a set chroma sample thing right here, and that will set the chroma sample. So for instance, this particular shortcut will bring in a, let me just bring this in. So if I run this shortcut, you'll see what happens. It brings in a lower thirds title that I had dynamically generated earlier. So as an example, if I type custom chroma title and say hello from office hours, I tap this, what it's going to do is going to create a graphic with the green screen background, upload it to my media player still slot index, I don't know, 15 or 16, and then replace that image. And so you see how.
And we saw a little bit of a flash, but that's because it was live while you did it.
That's because I had to delete the media still and then replace it. Okay.
Right.
So ideally, you would probably turn off the chroma key, upload the still, and then bring it back. Right. So
that's really, by the way, that solves a whole bunch of problems on our end. That's really great.
Yeah. So yes, you can set the chroma sample just by getting whatever the current value is, the numbers, and then inputting them into an action here. Or you could
but you have to put it in the action because is there anywhere in your interface that will let you explicitly put those numbers in?
Unfortunately, no. So I kind of mimicked how Atem software control worked with that kind of like that little dragging box interface.
Oh, very good. Next question.
Next question comes just from Hasmuk in Cape Town. And Hasmuk asks, this may not be a mix effect issue, but for art to be included in the foreground or background, must it be in Atem Media Pool 1?
It can be Media Pool 2 or 1. So right now I'm actually using input 5, I think, which is my Apple TV. So I have an iPod Touch that's running VLC that's playing a looping animation. So you can see kind of like my background is slightly moving, but you could set it to Media Player 1 or 2. So if I set it to 2, you'll see that green screen graphic that we had created earlier. If I'd set it to Media Player 1, I think it will be my Media Player 1 is something else. It's actually the same thing. So if I set it to this background image here, you'll see that it's the downstream keyer logo that I've been using. But yeah, you could have it basically be any source.
Yeah, it could be anything out there. We've used one of the things we played with is using our Raspberry Pi, the Playout B, as a way to just have a little looping videos that you can actually cut to as your background. Next question.
Tim McCulloch in Wichita, Kansas says, to use mix effects, I need to replace my Gen 1 iPad. What is the minimum, medium, and oh my gosh, this is fabulous model iPads to consider?
So that's actually a Gen 1 iPad right there in my background. You need something that can run iOS 14. So the minimum ones, I think, is an iPad Air 2 or an iPad Mini 4. But those are pretty old. I do have some users that are using them that say it does work. On iPod Touch 7th generation, it's a little, the screen is small, but it still works. That's probably the cheapest device that you can get. I'm currently running on an iPad Pro 2018, which I still think is a fantastic device compared with the 2020 and certainly the M1 version. So if you can find one of those for cheap, I think that'd be a great device to use. This is the 12.9 inch.
And the lower end newer ones, I think that are like $300 and some, I think are probably, those all work, don't they?
Yeah. So I think this is the iPad 8th generation
right.
or the iPad Air 4.
Right.
Be fine. And then there's also the iPad Mini, but I would wait because if that full screen edge to edge iPad Mini 6 comes out, I think that's the one to get.
Yeah, that's great. Next question.
Barry Brimer is back with, first, thanks for such a well-designed visual app. Within 10 minutes of download, I purchased the Pro version. Do you have plans to add small preview icons to the media pool?
Yeah, so that's something I would like to have. I need to figure out how to actually download the thumbnails from the Atem. And then I also have to figure out, like when you start up Atem software control on your computer, and then you tap the media player, you see the images loading, one at a time, and they load quite slowly. So I think there's like a lot of data that's being sent to the Atem, and I want to balance kind of the performance. So it might be that if I get to work, you'd have to like tap on this to see what the preview is. It would download it like right then. So because again, if you connect and reconnect and it has to download a lot of stuff, I think that might lead to some performance problems. But it's something I do want to add. It's just I need to figure out how to do it. On a similar note, uploading images, you can't currently upload images if they have like the pre-multiplied alpha set. So I'm just trying to figure out how to upload it if the original image had pre-multiplied alpha, to upload that. So you can do things like create an image in Pixelmator or something like that, and just like upload it straight from the app, and then it will have all the alpha channels set.
Yeah, and as a note, as you're going through that, is that we have found, I mean, you may have already found this, that what you want to do is a TGA with pre-multiplied and not ping or TIFF, because we get hard edges. So if you're having trouble with it,
okay.
yeah, so the TGA is the only one that really works well. The other ones can work, but rare, so especially with soft edges, curved edges, those fine edges, and the only app other than Photoshop that exports those out is that we know of, that's readily available, is Affinity Pro. And the reason that the TGA export is there is because some Atem users push pretty hard for the proper TGA output. Compressor, for instance, doesn't output. It outputs TGAs, but they're compressed TGAs, which means we can't use them. So anyway, I would use either Affinity. We found that Affinity Pro, and of course Photoshop, is the one that always puts it out the way it should go out. If it's TGA, and it has to be it has to be pre-multiplied with the black in the RGB channel, or it doesn't work.
Right now I convert the image to a PNG. So what I'll do is I'll look to see if the file format is a TGA, and that'll be a quick way to just upload it straight up to the Atem.
Yeah, because we found that we've had a lot of trouble with pings. Getting hard edges is usually the issue, aliasing. Next question.
Hasmuk here in the panel from Cape Town, South Africa, says a macro recorded in Mixpre is noted in the macros list in the Atem software. I assume that if the macro is edited, it syncs with the Atem software. And if that macro is listed in the Atem software, do I need Mixeffect to be running on the device?
So Mixeffect just reads the macros from the Atem. So if it will read it and then write it back. The way I'm doing the icons and stuff, I'm stuffing that information into the description. So, there's like the name of the macro and then the description. So I'm putting stuff, all this like macro color and icon into that. So if you look at in Atem software control and you do like get info, you'll see like all this other information if you've modified stuff within Mixeffect. And
are those icons and the colors showing up in the Atem software?
Oh, no.
Yeah, it only shows up in yours, right? Yeah. It's hidden there, but it's just the that's fascinating.
Right.
Next question. Oh, are you there, Bill? Did we lose Bill? Oh, I think I expected Bill to drop out at 8:30, but not 8:25. so I'll jump into the questions there. Jesse Mills asks, will Mixeffect Pro work with the Atem 1 ME 4K? If so, could it help generate a sort of super source?
So I haven't tested on the Atem 1ME Production Studio 4K. I did test on the Atem Production Studio 4K and it worked. But I think super source only exists on the 2ME and up. So you would probably have to do something with the upstream here in the DVE to get something, but you'd only be able to get, how many DVEs does that have? Does it have 1 or 2?
I think it has 2.
So
it has more buses, but I don't know if it has a DVE on every bus.
Yeah. So this doesn't this doesn't bring super source to those other switchers like an Atem Mini. So you still need to get a switcher that does that. Now that said, with the super source, what's interesting is that you have the 4 boxes with the super source, but you also have the 2 DVEs. So you could do this. So I'm going to run this shortcut that's going to create a 6 super source layout. So using the DVE. So you see my big box, and then the first three are the SuperSource ones, but then the other ones, which has Alex in it right now, and then the black box is actually the DVE USK1 and USK2 as a DVE.
Yeah, and that is painful to do on the on the Atem without the software. So those
Yes.
kinds of things and being able to transition in and out of them seamlessly is a big reason that as soon as I jumped on MixFX Pro and started playing with it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have this. Like because it's just that wrestling that was so seamlessly done right there is a lot of setup on an Atem.
Right. And actually another thing is like when you're recording macros, I noticed in Atem software control, you have to like touch each little thing if you want it to be changed when you're recording a macro. So for instance,
it is literally the most painful part of the process.
Yeah. So I added this button down here called Set All Settings. You tap that, and basically every setting that's in this particular panel gets set, recorded into the macro. So
like everybody's just like, oh man, if anybody who doesn't have it now will have it now.
Yeah. So basically, most of the controls have the Set All Settings button here, and that's exactly what it's meant for.
I mean, literally, that has been that is one. Now, there are times when you don't want to do that. You don't want to change everything, and there is a reason to not have that happen. But the fact that is the thing that literally takes up 90% of the time is going through and trying to painstakingly remember what you had changed within each one of these to make it work.
Right.
So that's fantastic. Another question from Hasmukh Gajar. He said, if I create a macro in MixFX that selects the super source and save that macro, the saved macro will be listed on the Atem. Is the super source selected in the MixFX embedded in the macro, assuming that the super source selected does not exist in the Atem?
Not exactly. So the way it works is this. So when you do a super source transition, so if I make myself disappear and make myself appear, I'm sending commands to the Atem to like move the boxes. If you try to record a macro, and I'll show you how this works. So let's just record a macro, and we'll give it slot 16, and we'll say super source no frames. Just call it this. And record this. So let me actually turn off a setting. So by default, there's a setting called add pause step when recording macros for SuperSource. So I'm going to turn this off because that's what it is by default. And then I'm going to, you have this little bar here that I can just like move around that tells me that I'm recording. And I'm going to just transition to say this camera here. And I'm going to say stop. So you saw that I did not, and I'm going to go back to this. So you saw I did not have that preference set. So when I tap this, it's just going to switch because the macro just looks at what the final state of your settings are, and it's not recording every step of the way. But if I did turn that feature on, and then I record the macro again, so I'm going to record this. Let's say re-record macro, re-record, go to SuperSource, and I'm just going to transition back to this iPad one. Okay, I'm going to say stop. Now you see when I run that exact same macro, you'll see that it does the transition. But watch what happens if I run it again. Okay, so it's recording every step of the macro of the super source from the position that it started to the ending position. So in this case, you kind of don't want this because it starts from when I was big, camera one, to the final thing. Versus if I was using super source here, I could just tap this and it transitions to me. I tap this. If I tap it again, nothing happens because it's already in the transition. So when you use SuperSource from the SuperSource panel, it knows where I am and where I'm going. But in a macro, it just records what was recorded. It starts from where it was and goes to where it needs to go. So
it does what you told it to do, not what you meant it to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why either using SuperSource like this or using like a shortcut where you can do things like, what is the current state of the Atem right now? If it's this, then do this. If it's that, do this, is very powerful.
Yeah, go ahead, Hasmukh.
So are you saying that I create a macro in MixFX, depending on how I want to change from one super source to another, run that rather from MixFX than trying to run it from the Atem? Is that what you're saying?
I would say if you want kind of the seamless transitions back and forth, to do it from Mix Effect or Companion with a Stream Deck, rather than baking it into a macro.
And one question is, well, two questions there that just popped up, but one question is that you're able to create these super sources, but you have these little numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are like, they're all almost like mini super sources, right?
The numbers in the icons or the number in the name?
Well, the numbers in right above the super source, little circles with a number. You have 1 and 2 are selected.
Oh,
these are like
so
little. They're like little,
this,
and this is not available in the Atem, right? I mean, it's something that's kind of in your software.
Right. So this is what's called the highlight. So for instance, if I was let me go to this one here. If I was in a 3 grid here and I wanted to highlight box 1, I could just tap 1 and it would like, box 1 is actually my picture here. And it kind of makes me bigger and makes everyone else smaller. If I want to highlight box 2, which is the iPad, I can like do that. So if you're like doing a show where you have like a 4 grid of people, you could just like, and you can do command 1 on the keyboard to like do it. You can like highlight someone who's talking.
And how do you create those if you're making your own?
How to make a super source preset?
Well, the super source, but how to the little highlighters, the highlights.
What do you call those highlights?
I call them highlight.
Right.
So it's just you just push the button and then Mix Effect knows, okay, I need to make box 1 bigger, and then I'll make the other one smaller. And you can configure like the size of how big you want the boxes to be by choosing from the menu, like grow highlight box by 1.1. I can say like
that's dope.
Like
that
this,
is so cool.
And then you see it becomes much bigger, right?
Yeah.
Very cool.
And these are all accessible over Stream Deck or Companion or other things back to MixFX Pro, right?
That's right. So if you have a Stream Deck, and I don't have it plugged in right now, but you can basically export these icons, and then there's the OSC commands that you can enter into Companion to say, run this super source preset, and then over here in the view all presets page, you can just like right click and then choose like save preset icon, and you can save an image of it, the 72 by 58, or if you want to create like lower third overlays that are specifically tuned to that, you can actually export a 1080p version of the image. And then it'll just be saved right to your photo library. So we can see this works. So it just exports this gigantic image that you can then throw into Photoshop and do your thing.
That's great. Go ahead, Hosma.
Those highlight buttons you showed, are they created by default when you create your super source?
They're always available. So it knows which boxes are visible on screen. So that's why 3 and 4 are grayed out right now. But if I enabled box 3, you'll see at least eventually box 3 will become highlighted, and then you could bring that into highlight that. But right now box 3 is off screen. So that's why it's not visible.
Yeah, that's great. Next question is from Roscoe Jones. He said, did I hear correctly that MixFX Pro will run better on an M1 Mac than on an iOS device? Is connectivity more stable when running on an M1 Mac?
So Mix Effect on Apple Silicon is not officially supported, just because for me, from a developer, it's just a checkbox, like make it available. And then so I haven't really done too much kind of debugging to handle all the kind of the cases. There are some weirdness when moving from touch to mouse. So sometimes moving like the switcher interface. Sorry, I don't have this control up. I think it's this one. So moving this interface sometimes acts a little funny when you're trying to click and drag that. But it is connected, to the Mac, and it's running in the background. So you could, as long as you don't hide Mix Effect, it will still be running if you go to like another application. But I have seen where Mix Effect just running on the M1 sometimes gets frozen. So you kind of have to like quit and restart it. So
it's not recommended yet.
You can use it, and if you run into problems, let me know and I'll look into it.
Great.
So at some point I will want to kind of like beef it up to make it a little bit more like a first-class citizen with the iOS
that's great
versions.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. He said, the scripting engine in MixFX Pro seems very powerful. Have you thought of adding the capability to control external devices as well?
So like make it like a companion type thing.
I guess so being able to send commands out.
Yeah. So I think right now I don't have a send OSC command. There is actually a way to do like more hyperdeck stuff. So you know how in Atem software control, you can control up to 4 hyperdecks. But I do have a send hyperdeck command, which uses the TCP/IP protocol that basically you can use it to control, as many hyperdecks as you have on the network. You just need to know kind of like the commands to send to it. That's in the hyperdeck manual.
So that's a shortcut that comes with Mixeffect that you have on your computer. So like for instance, for us, we start a lot of ISOs, being able to hit a button and have it say send record command to all of our decks at one time.
Yep, that should work.
Yeah.
Test and verify, of course.
Oh yeah. That's definitely a test and verify. But we can see them. It'd just to be nice to hit a button, and right now the guys still go over manually. We've been talking about writing a script that will do it, but if you already have one here.
Yeah. So you just have like a for loop that just have 16 commands that just have the different IP addresses. But to answer the original question, like, do I see it like controlling other applications? There's a balance on like how much I want to put into Mixeffect, right? Or like before it becomes like too much. Like it's already like a Swiss Army knife for Atems, but can it be like a companion competitor? And I don't think that's the future of it, just because companion has like hundreds of contributors to it. So
but I think that the being able to send OSC commands is probably, from our perspective, enough, because that ties back into the ecosystem as opposed to trying to do everything that companion or other apps do.
Right. Yeah, that might be a good feature to add for the next release.
Chris Fenwick says, when you changed the text in your dynamically created keyed graphic, instead of a flash in the PGM out, could you just program it to dissolve the current image out, swap the image in to the media player, and then rekey the new graphic?
So the upstream keyer doesn't have an auto transition, so it can't make it fade away. And when you upload something, I've found bugs where if you actually try to upload and replace, that actually looks better, but it actually can cause the Atem to crash, like in a spectacular fashion. So what I'm doing is I actually send the delete command and then upload. I still see problems where sometimes you try to upload an image and then the Atem just gets in this weird state. And that's why I actually have this kind of alert dialog box that appears like, warning, just be careful when you try to upload something.
Well, and one of the things that so I tend to use, is it smoother with the downstream key as opposed to the upstream key?
The downstream key can do the auto transition, but again, so it could theoretically work, but then it can't do. You'd have to have the pre-multiplied alpha
or Luma. Old fogies like me have been using Luma keys for 30 years, and so the main thing that we do is, unless I really have to do it, like the with the key that you just showed us earlier, I would have done that with a Luma key. And the reason that we do that without the chroma key is because chroma is subsampled to 422, which means we'll have aliasing along curved edges, and so to get rid of that, we go back to the Luma key, and then we use the downstream keyer. And so I only use chroma key for graphics when in really dire circumstances, typically. Go ahead, Chris.
So first of all, Adam, this is totally cool, and thanks for coming to talk to us. But although there is not a specific button to auto an upstream key in and out, you can dissolve that key in and out by turning on the key 1 button and only the key 1 button, and then performing a transition. So you could dissolve that graphic out. And I only say that because I've been around, developers who are developing switcher software before. And there was a time in the late 90s where I literally had to drag the programmer over to a booth that had a Grass Valley 100 and explain to him, look, if you push both of these buttons, this fader bar will change the key and the background at the same time. And he went, like, it blew him away that you could push both buttons, and he had to rewrite the way it worked in his software so that you could, anyway, you could fade out an upstream key.
Yeah, the other solution is to use the flying key. and just like move it out of the way, change it, and then bring it back.
Right.
So
that's
I always find that key button on the switcher interface.
Yeah.
So if we go back here, I always find these things to like very confusing. Like what
Yeah.
is how come if I do this, the button doesn't go away, but if I do this, it goes away. So it's
right. So here's another thought I had, that using multi-touch on an iPad, you should be able to, with 3 fingers, say, press the background, key 1 and key 3, and highlight all 3 of them. And then the next transition will change the background and remove the first 2 keys. But if you just click, you know, the key 1, now your fader bar is, the only thing it's doing is changing that key state, on or off, fade up, fade out.
Right. Well, let's actually just test this in real time. So we have it on air. I have the key 1 on. I'm gonna, let's see.
Turn off the background.
Turn off the background.
Click, there you go. Now pull your fader bar.
Okay, and I made my preview back to super source.
Yeah.
Oh,
There it goes.
look at that.
Well, now notice you're wiping in your transition style. So change that to mix. Now, there you go.
Cool.
Mind's
Learn something
blown.
new every day.
All right. Next question is from TJ Asher. He says, can we congratulate Atem on a fantastic presentation and the ability to show the program live and in action and talk about eating your own dog food? Yes. Yeah. We, very, very well done. We hope to see more. Yeah. Chris Fenwick says, I notice we all have said Mix Effects Pro, plural. The software is actually called Mix Effect Pro, singular. On a scale of 1 to infuriating, how much does this bother you when we say the wrong name?
It's okay. I mean, when I was coming up with a name, I was like, what name should this be? Atem Super Controller, or what? And then I saw all these terms, like the term ME, like what does ME stand for? Mix effect. And I was like, is there actually is it just a generic name?
It's a great name. We just all say it wrong. Every
we all
one
say
of us has said it wrong.
But now that Chris has brought it up, we'll never say it wrong again.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, people are even typing it in Mukana wrong.
Yeah. Go ahead,
I mean,
Ken.
there is the term mix effects bus or buses. So I can see how, if you're long in the industry, you would say, mix effects.
But
I just want to say that it has never been wrong on the website or the schedule. I saw the name and I checked. I saw it was wrong, and it was always right on the website. Just saying.
Douglas Carmichael said, would you consider adding MIDI or OSC control to Mix Effect Pro? I could see it being very useful for running live visuals for music under the control of another application.
Yeah, so it does support OSC for a small subset of the commands. The original reason why I added that was so you could do super source transitions from a Stream Deck. But then I decided, should I make it available for like every command? That's a monumental undertaking to basically, I support shortcuts and then OSC and then obviously the touch controls. And I don't know if I'm going to do that. Same with MIDI. I need to understand if there's like a library. I'm using like an OSC library to kind of open source library to kind of add that feature to it. If there's like an open source MIDI library, which I'm sure there is for Swift and iOS development, I could certainly look into that. That's just something that though I don't really quite understand. So I need to beef up my knowledge.
No, absolutely. Next question is from Stephen Kimbrough. He said, using Mix Effect with Companion in Stream Deck, do you see an advantage for less skilled folks to switch an event? They get the Stream Deck only and get scenes buttons, buttons that do the thing.
Certainly. I mean, I have customers that are using Mix Effect only through Companion, right? And that's how they do their shows, that they have like, I don't know, 5 Stream Decks and you're just like pushing buttons, and they don't even use Atem software control since they've done so much to kind of, configure their setup just the way they want it to. I do see a way, if we bring back my screen. So there is a way to kind of configure the switcher interface where you can have different panels. So this one is a super source plus VFA, video fault, the audios thing. So you could theoretically kind of make a switcher panel that only has the basics for someone to use and say, just go use that. And you can actually hide other sections. I can just like, if I don't want them to see macros, I can just like get rid of it. I don't know.
And how do you build those? How do you build those interfaces?
So you can go into the switcher, this is called the switcher page section, and then you just tap edit this page, and then you see a list of options. So there's 3 layouts. One is portrait, which is kind of like the iPhone. One is landscape, which is kind of a misnomer. It's just if you're on an iPad with a slightly smaller width of the screen, that's what this interface is. And then there's the iPad, which has the little sidebar and has more columns. And then you basically say, you know, I want at the top, I want to display, and you have a whole list of all this stuff. So I want to say program preview wide input. And then I'll just say close, and you'll see now the new panel just appeared at the top that has wide buttons for your 8
Here's the
camera
worst part. Now
inputs,
I'm going,
and then that.
I might get 2 of these. And then I have one that's like the quick draw. And then the other one is like the more detailed, you know, you could end up with a lot of, interface.
And then you could bind these to companion buttons. So you can just tap one button and it'll just switch it straight to, you know, a different interface, or you can use the keyboard to switch between all your different pages. So if you just have like a simple one here, this is like cut and auto, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the little fader bar, which right now it's the same input. So you don't see anything different.
Right. That's great. Jonas Sattel from Ruttlingen says, is there a way to copy a macro from Atem to A to Atem B?
Not from Mix Effect. I think there is a way. The API does have a way to get the raw bits. So technically it might be possible, but I haven't tried that yet.
Next question from TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota says, on what device is Atem running Mix Effect Pro for the demo?
So this is running on an iPad Pro 2018, but I also have this iPhone 11 that's running that I was like doing super switch transitions, so you can see me like switching on the iPad. So and I also have an iPod Touch over here that I've been using it on, and an iPad Mini 5.
Interesting. Ken Jordan says, are those Apple shortcuts you demonstrated available anyway?
Yeah. So if you go to settings, go to Mix Effect settings, automations, there'll be a section called sample shortcuts. And then if you just tap more shortcuts, you'll go to a web page that has all the shortcuts that I demoed during this particular show. And then there's a few extra ones as well.
That's great. Roscoe Jones says, Alex and Chad, may we please have a Mix Effect Pro channel in our Discord? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'll get this into the channel. Hopefully we'll be able to persuade Atem to come by every once in a while and see. I know you're already in our Discord because that's where I've been talking to you. And so we'll put up a channel, and if it gets too busy, we'll put up a category. I mean, I think there's just a lot of us that are using this. So it'd be great to have a section in here because I think we're going to have a lot of users within the group using it. It's an amazing piece of software.
Yeah, I'm happy also to do a lab as well in the future.
Oh yeah. So we'll find some Saturday labs to do a couple hours, just kind of playing with it and building it out. We'll give people a couple weeks to settle in, and then we'll work with doing a lab with Atem. That'd be amazing. Next question, we have Hasmukh asks, I noticed that your switcher tab had a window for your super source. Is the screen layout editable? I do not see what you're showing. I think that's what we just kind of covered.
Yeah. So you just go to the icon in the upper right, and then you can create a new switcher page and then add whatever modules you want to that page. Amazing.
Next question is also from Hasmukh, obviously becoming a heavy user of the app. Atem, you have completely changed how I use the Atem. I would want to acknowledge Atem's very responsive approach to helping us out. I will read the manual. Thank you. The next question is from Roscoe Jones. He said, is there a way to export the ME Pro custom interface from one device to another?
The Mix Effect Pro, so the switcher pages don't have a way to be exported right now. Super source layouts you can export. So if you go here and then tap the little thing in the upper right, and then you can tap export all presets. That will export like all your presets. If you're in list mode, you can export them individually. So if you just like, I want to export these because I like them, you can just tap this. You can copy it to the clipboard. You can export it, and it'll save it to a file that you can.
And those are just XML.
Then it's a JSON, and then you can
JSON.
send that to someone else or add that to a shortcut. Because there's a shortcut command like import presets, and you just paste in the text, and then you can send that shortcut to someone and say, "Here, load these," and then it'll just load them all up onto into their system.
And how does it know if you send something and you have custom artwork for it? How does it know what to do with those?
Custom artwork? You mean custom input sources?
Well, let's say you have, for my, a lot of the stuff that we do doesn't necessarily move the windows around the way yours does. We actually build mortises and so on and so forth around the objects. And so the question is, how do we bring those in with it?
Yeah.
Do they have to be in the same media place, or do they know the name? How does that work?
Right. So on Atem Mini Extreme, you don't have the ability to set like the border. So those settings don't get changed. So for that, I would use you can actually create a shortcut that does the SuperSource art border. So if we just create a new one right here, you just say, SuperSource, let's see, art details. You can say set art details, and then you can set the border and set all the commands right there. And then you can just send that and along with your preset imports. Now the art is another thing. If you're using like a graphic, then you need to kind of send the graphic along as well.
Right. So you'd have to have something that grabs onto that graphic. Is there a way to try?
You can import graphics as well, but again, if it has like the pre-multiplied, I think media upload. There's upload still, so you can upload an image from your photo library to whatever media player in the index like that.
That's great. Next question is, I went to call out for next question. I realized I'm the one reading the questions. TJ Asher says, it seems that multiple instances of Mix Effect Pro on different devices can connect to the same Atem Mini. Is this a correct assumption?
Oh yeah, you could actually have like 3 instances up at once. So let's see if this actually works. So you can have split view and then slide over, all connected to the same Atem. So I might be hitting that 5 limit right now, but you can see I have the switcher on in this thing here. We have audio here, and I have SuperSource over here. Or you could actually connect to 3 different Atems. So you could have like Atem Extreme on the left, Atem Mini on the right, and then something else in the split view.
Yeah, it's interesting because it when we think about being able to, for instance, what I'm looking at it to simplify some of the processes with what we do with our morning show is being able to let 3 different people from around the world be able to run our switcher. One thing that would be, I think, useful as I look at it is being able to lock things off. So having those custom views, but be able to send someone something that's all they get. Yeah.
So the ability to add kind of like user permissions and controls is something I've thought about, but it's not something that I have a good grasp on how I'd implement. There is a view only mode switch. So if you turn this on here, basically it turns the interface into this mode where you can't touch anything. I'm touching the interface right now and nothing's happening. So you can just hand this to someone and say, watch me, right? Yeah. But then, and if you want to turn it off, you have to tap the little eye icon up top, and it'll use Face ID to unlock view only mode.
Yeah, I think for us, what we want to do is give someone one of those custom views and lock it to that custom view, like get rid of that side view, get rid of the column and just give them, and that's the only view that they get to see. So that, hey, if you're cutting the show, but I don't want you to do anything else, or you're managing audio, but I don't want you to do anything else. Those types of things of keeping people in a box would be, that's something that no other software does right now. And it seems like you're like 90% there, but we all know the last 10% is 90% of the work.
Right. Talk to me. If you have a feature, I'm very responsive. If the feature makes sense and it's not going to take like months to develop, it's something that I can probably add. So there's like, the HyperDeck thing, which I can't demo because again, my HyperDeck's off. Like someone asked, I usually use the HyperDeck to record. And so if I'm giving it to less trained people, I want it to say, if it's not recording, to like flash in red or something like that.
Right.
And I thought about that and said, oh yeah, it's not that hard. So I added that in the latest version, where you can turn on this warning and the box will turn red. And then, another person asked, can you make the time code display in red when it's recording? That's a reasonable request, and it helps the user. So if there's things that you think Mixify can benefit from, definitely drop a note in whatever channel you.
And again, we're gonna have a channel soon. So so I think that'll be great. Todd Reynolds asks, he says, I used Mixify last week on second hour, and now it occurs to me that I could have used my foot pedal via MIDI. Would love that feature.
Yeah, again, I have to look into how I can support MIDI. And if it's as easy as like OSC was, then something I could probably add relatively quickly. So no promises, but I will look into it.
Stephen Kimbrough says, can we get a project before the lab session? Yeah, so we'll figure out a challenge for people to do, or here's a couple things that we're going to work on the lab sessions, and we'll give everybody a little time to think about that and then put it out. So let's keep thinking about that, especially in the pre-show. We'll talk about that a little bit. Now, Chris Fenwick from Sacramento says, just curious, how did you pick your icon colors for the Supersaurus boxes, blue for 1, red for 2, etc.?
That's a good question.
User interface design. I'm always curious. Sorry.
Okay, so red, obviously, because the button is red, and green because the button is green. I went away from orange, which is another of the Blackmagic colors, because orange looked too close to red. So I thought, and then blue, blue, because red versus blue, that's a common thing. And then politics, purple, it's red and blue together. So that's how the colors came about.
That's great. That's great. Guy Cochran from Seattle says, is there anything that other Atem iOS apps do that Mixify should do next?
So there's been a feature request to add like playback of video. So let Mixify be like a hyperdeck. And if you recall earlier in my discussion, Mixify originally was a titling app. So it output actually through HDMI, a green screen, or a Luma key, and then you could put titles and things like that. There's a problem with that with Mixify, in that it needs to be running all the time if you're outputting HDMI. So if you switch to another app because you're like doing something, but it was actually also being the Luma key or like a playback, then you're suddenly going to see your iPad screen in the background, which is probably not a good thing. So I think for apps like that, which I'm still thinking about, it'd be better if it was a separate app rather than being part of Mixify. Yeah. So there are other, there's an app called Live App Pro that does exactly that. It has some basic switching, and it can output, it's like a hyperdeck or a playout B, and that's also based on Swift Atem, from what I understand. So that's good that that if you're using that app, it's based on the same underlying technology that Mixify is running. So that's a good app. There's other apps that can control Atems, and honestly, I haven't really looked too deeply into their feature set. But everyone's doing slightly different things, and I think that if you use these apps, you'll find some things work better than in others, and it's your choice to choose which one you want to kind of commit to.
Absolutely. And last question is from Roberto Barro from Plymouth Meeting PA. He says, does Mixify Pro run on PC?
It does not, unfortunately. So it's heavily based on kind of the iOS frameworks and Apple Developer SDK. So a common question I've got is, does it run on Windows, or is there going to be an Android version? And the short answer is no. And the long answer is, given my long history with Apple, going back to the Apple II, the early Macs, the Newton and stuff, I can't go to the other side. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. It's a really amazing application, and you're really what I think this shows is the power when someone who's actually when I mean particular, I mean attention to detail user who is then writing the code, how powerful that is, that you're fixing your own problems in an elegant way. And then we all get to ride along and, and hopefully add a couple things here and there. And, but it's just a groundbreaking application. So
Yeah.
just really appreciate your time and appreciate your application.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, the response I've been getting from users has been really, really heartwarming. Just to see people using it in their productions and how it's kind of up-leveled their workflows and their productions has been really great to see.
It literally doubles or triples the value of the Atem. Like it is literally the most important app that has been written for the Atem, in my opinion, just because of all the features that it does and the ease of use, and it's putting in things that have been incredible pain points for what we're doing. Thank you to the panel for all the great questions and interaction. Thank you to the producers for all the great questions and driving this forward. We can't do it without all of you. And now we're going to jump to the post show. So thanks so much. Thank you again, Adam. Thanks to everybody, and we'll see you later.